She was standing in my backyard, pointing at my vegetable garden like it was a pile of junk left out for the curb. "All of this has to go," my daughter-in-law told the landscaper, loud enough for the whole neighborhood to hear. "We want a flagstone patio right here. Fire pit there." My son was standing right beside her, hands in his pockets, nodding like he was approving a business proposal at work. 26 years. I had tended that garden for 26 years. My late husband Leon planted the first lavender bush the spring before his diagnosis. I added the tomato beds after we lost him. I added the snap peas the year my son graduated high school and I needed something alive to take care of. I added the raised herb beds one Christmas when I decided I was done grieving and ready to grow things again. My daughter-in-law was waving her hand over all of it like it was a weed patch. And my son was nodding. I stood at the back gate with my grocery bags in both hands, and I felt something shift inside me. Not grief, not yet, something older and quieter than either of those things. Let me back up so you understand how I got to that moment. My name is Beatrice. I am 63 years old, and for the past 4 years I have been slowly erased inside the walls of my own home. My son Seth is 38. He is a good-looking man who could be charming when he chose to be. I raised him alone after his father Leon passed from pancreatic cancer when Seth was 16. I worked 2 jobs the first 3 years after the funeral. Days at the middle school where I taught 7th grade English, evenings tutoring students in our living room for extra money. I kept the house, kept Seth in baseball camp and new cleats and college prep courses. I gave him everything I had. He met Jade at a work happy hour about 5 years ago. She was 33 at the time, pretty in a way that knew exactly how pretty it was. From the very first dinner, she sat across from me and spoke to Seth and only Seth as if I were a painting on the wall behind him. I told myself she was nervous. I told myself she needed time. They got married. I helped pay for the rehearsal dinner because Jade's father Clyde said money was tight. The same Clyde who drove a new Escalade and wore a Rolex on each wrist when he talked about money being tight. I smiled and wrote the check because that is what I did. I gave and I swallowed the discomfort, and I told myself it was love. 14 months into their marriage, Seth appeared at my door on a Thursday evening with 2 suitcases. "Temporary," he said. Jade had left her marketing job downtown and was looking for something better. And he was waiting onto a promotion, and the apartment lease was up. Could they stay for a while? Just a little while. That was 4 years ago. The first year was uncomfortable but survivable. Jade watched everything with that particular kind of quiet that isn't peace, it's assessment. She observed how I used my kitchen, how I arranged my living room, how I folded my dish towels. She asked small questions that weren't really questions. "Don't you think that couch is a little dated, Beatrice? Beatrice, why do you still have a landline? Beatrice, nobody cooks with that much butter anymore." The second year she stopped asking and started telling. She rearranged my kitchen drawers. She replaced my dish towels without mentioning it. She informed me that her sister and brother-in-law would be visiting for a long weekend and that I should make the guest room available. My guest room. She didn't say please. She scheduled it the way you schedule a conference room at the office. I cooked for them. I did their laundry when Jade mentioned she was tired. I drove to the pharmacy when Jade had a migraine and Seth texted asking if I could pick up her prescription. I did all of it because I loved my son and I wanted peace in my home. But you cannot make peace with someone who has decided to conquer you. Every concession I made, Jade took as evidence that more concessions were available. By the 3rd year, I had become the housekeeper. Jade had picked up a part-time consulting arrangement she described as intis, that from what I observed, consisted primarily of phone calls taken from my sofa while I vacuumed around her feet. Seth worked long hours and trusted Jade completely, which meant he trusted her version of me. Her version was that I was difficult, that I was passive-aggressive, that I hovered. I know because I heard him use those exact words through the wall one night when they thought I was asleep. I went into my garden after. I pulled weeds in the dark until my hands stopped shaking. That was how I kept my sanity through year 3. The garden was mine. Jade hadn't touched it. It was the one part of the property that still felt entirely like me. Leon's lavender, my tomatoes, the rosemary I'd been harvesting for 15 years, the hummingbird feeder Seth had given me one Mother's Day when he was 22 and still the son I recognized. Even when the rest of the house had started to feel like somewhere I'd been reassigned to live, I had the garden. Until I came home from Kroger on a Tuesday afternoon in October, and found two men with shovels reducing it to rubble. "What are you doing?" I said from the gate. My voice came out very quiet, which was the opposite of what was happening inside me. Jade turned around from where she'd been standing with the landscaper. "Oh, good, you're back. We're doing a whole outdoor refresh back here. Flagstone, fire pit, some string lights, it's going to be gorgeous. So much more functional than all this." She gestured at the destruction like she was presenting an upgrade. Seth said, "It's going to look great, Mom." He had the look he always got when he'd agreed to something he knew was wrong and decided confidence could cover for it. "This is my garden," I said. "Leon planted that lavender. You had no right to touch a single inch of it." Jade's expression shifted into the patient, slightly pained look she reserved for when she felt I was being unreasonable. "We live here too, Beatrice. The space was going to waste." Leon's lavender, 26 years going to waste. I set my grocery bags on the patio steps. I walked back through the house and upstairs to my bedroom. I sat on the edge of my bed with my hands in my lap and listened to the sound of shovels scraping through my garden. Seth knocked 20 minutes later. "Mom, can we not make this a whole thing?" She just wanted to do something nice. "Nice for whom?" I asked. He sighed the way you sigh at a child who keeps bringing up something inconvenient. "You know how she is. She just gets excited about projects. The fire pit is going to be—" "Leave me alone, Seth." He left. I heard him go back downstairs. I heard Jade say something. I heard my son laugh, small, easy, completely unbothered. And that laugh was somehow the thing that undid me most, because it meant he had made his choice and then moved past it in roughly 4 seconds. That was when my phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Morris, who had been my accountant since Leon was alive and my attorney for the past 11 years. "Beatrice, urgent. Got a call from First National today. Someone submitted documents claiming you granted power of attorney to Seth over the property. I never prepared those documents. The signatures are forged. Call me right now." I read it 3 times. I sat in my bedroom while the sound of my garden being destroyed came up through the window. And I read that text 3 times, and I understood that the patio was not the worst thing that had happened today. Seth and Jade were 2 floors below me, and they had absolutely no idea that the ground they thought they were building on had just begun to crack. I called Morris. He told me everything calmly and completely, the way he always did. 3 weeks earlier, someone had submitted a forged power of attorney to First National Bank, claiming I had authorized Seth to act on my behalf regarding the property. They had applied for a home equity line of credit, $180,000 against a house worth just under $400,000. The bank's fraud detection unit flagged it because the notarization didn't match their records. They called Morris to verify. He had never seen those documents. "I've put a freeze on all activity tied to your property," he said. "Nothing can move without your physical signature and my verification." "But Beatrice, this is wire fraud. This is a federal charge." "I understand," I said. "Do you want me to file a report?" "Not yet," I said. "Give me a few weeks. And Morris, I want you to pull together a complete statement of my holdings, everything." He was quiet for a moment. "What are you planning?" "I'm going to let them believe they're winning," I said, "and then I'm going to show them exactly who they were stealing from." I did not sleep well that night. I lay in the dark and thought about Seth at 16, sitting across from me at the kitchen table after the funeral eating cereal because neither of us could manage to cook a real meal. I thought about driving him to baseball practice at 6 in the morning for 3 years straight. I thought about taking the evening tutoring shifts so he could afford to go on the senior trip because I refused to let him miss it. Then I thought about a forged signature on a legal document in a bank's fraud file. Grief and rage are strange companions. They were both in the room with me that night, and somewhere around 3 in the morning, the rage went very quiet and very cold, and started thinking more clearly than grief ever does. They did not know who I was. They had seen a widowed schoolteacher in her 60s who cooked good meals and kept a pretty garden. They had never once asked what I did during the days. They had never wondered. They assumed I cleaned and watched television and stayed quietly out of the way. They had assumed a great deal. The next morning I left the house at 7:30 while Seth was in the shower and Jade was still asleep. I drove 20 minutes north to a professional office park near the highway and parked in front of a glass front building with a sign that read Cornerstone Learning Centers. Administrative offices. Priya, my front desk manager, looked up and smiled. Mrs. B, we weren't expecting you today. Felt like coming in, I said. Alton met me in the hallway. He was in his mid-50s, precise and dependable, and he had been running the day-to-day operations of Cornerstone for 12 years. He was one of 3 people who knew I owned it. We sat in my office and he walked me through the quarterly reports. 5 locations across the metro area. Enrollment was up at the Westfield Center. The new Northbrook location had broken even in its second month, ahead of projections. Combined annual revenue across all 5 was $3.2 million. My personal income after operating costs, staff salaries, and reinvestment was $420,000 last year. I need a complete asset summary by Friday, I told him. Property titles, investment accounts, everything. He didn't ask why. That was one of the reasons I trusted him. You'll have it by Thursday, he said. I had started Cornerstone 30 years ago in my living room with 6 students and a folding table I bought at a garage sale. What Seth knew was that I'd done tutoring part-time for extra money when he was growing up. What he didn't know was that I had never stopped, that I incorporated when he was in college, that I'd leased my first real commercial space when he was 23 and too absorbed in his own life to wonder what his mother was doing on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. That I had spent 30 years building something real and substantial and entirely my own, while wearing the same sensible cardigans and driving the same Honda Accord and maintaining a perfectly ordinary appearance, so that no one's, especially not Seth, would love me for my money instead of for me. By Thursday, I had the full picture in a folder on my kitchen table. The 5 centers. My house at just under $400,000. 2 rental condominiums generating $2,800 a month combined. An investment portfolio at $1.4 million. Total net worth, approximately $3.8 million. My son was trying to steal $180,000 from a woman worth nearly $4 million. If it weren't so painful, the math alone would be almost funny. At home, the pressure was building. Seth sat down with me one evening, wearing his mature, responsible expression. He said the house was a lot to manage at my age. He said there were very nice 55-plus communities in Clearfield. He said Jade and he had been thinking, and a sale made sense for everyone, and they'd thought a fair 3-way split of the proceeds would be. This house belongs to me, I said. The conversation is over, Seth. He left frustrated. That night through the wall I heard what I needed to hear. Jade, pressured and sharp. Dale says a different broker, different county, it's clean. Seth, quieter. I don't know, she's acting strange. Jade, she's not suspicious. She's stubborn. 2 more weeks. Dale. I had been waiting for that name. The next day I had a security consultant install 4 cameras while Seth was at work and Jade was out. Feeds I could access from my phone. That same week, Seth brought Dale home. A heavy-set man in his 40s with the kind of ease that comes from never having faced real consequences. I watched them from upstairs. I turned the audio up. Different notary, different county. By the time anyone flags it, the draw's already posted. She can't reverse a completed transaction. My son was quiet for 1 beat, just one. Do it. I saved the recording and sent it to Morris that night with a single line. It's time. Bring everything to the Howards' dinner Saturday. Jade's parents, Clyde and Belinda, were hosting a family dinner that weekend. Jade had mentioned it offhandedly. Her father wanted to celebrate some good news. She hadn't said what the good news was. I knew exactly what the good news was. They were going to announce the pending sale of my home before a single document had been signed, because they were that certain I had already been defeated. I was going to let them announce it. Saturday morning I woke up early and spent an hour getting ready. I put on the navy silk blazer I'd bought 2 years ago for an investor meeting. I wore the pearl earrings Leon gave me on our 20th anniversary. I pulled my hair back cleanly. When I came downstairs, Seth looked at me the way you look at something that doesn't match what you expected. You look different, Mom. It's a special occasion, I said. Jade looked me over with narrowed eyes and said nothing. Smart enough to sense something, not equipped enough to name it. Clyde and Belinda's house was exactly what you'd expect from people who performed wealth rather than built it. Large, decorator furnished, impressive from the curb and hollow past the foyer. Clyde held court in the living room, telling stories about his car dealership that grew more profitable with every telling. Belinda circulated with a charcuterie board. Jade's sister and her husband sat on the sectional, talking about a renovation they were financing on two incomes that clearly couldn't support it. I was not greeted when I walked in. I found a chair in the corner, and I watched the room the way I'd learned to watch things over a long career of being underestimated. Quietly, thoroughly, invisibly. Morris arrived at 7:15 with his briefcase and took a seat near me without drawing attention. I was placed at the far end of the dinner table where the folding chairs had been set up. I was fairly certain this was deliberate. After the main course, Clyde stood and tapped his wine glass. "Family," he said, beaming with his car salesman confidence. "I want to say how proud I am of Jade and Seth for finding a solution to their situation. With Beatrice's cooperation, they're moving forward with a sale that benefits everyone." He looked at me with an expression that was probably supposed to read as generous. It takes maturity to make a decision like this. Applause from around the table. Seth raised his glass. Jade looked at me with that tight, composed smile, waiting for me to nod, to look grateful, to play my role. I stood up. "I'd like to say something," I said, "since decisions are apparently being made about my property tonight." "Mom," Seth started. "There is no sale," I said. My voice was clear and even, and I did not rush it. "The house is mine. It is in my name alone. It will remain in my name." I looked at Jade, who had stopped smiling. I looked at Seth, who had gone the color of old chalk. "But there are some things none of you know about me. Things my son never thought to ask." I looked at Morris. He stood, opened his briefcase, and began placing certified documents on the table in front of him. "My name is Morris Kane," he said to the room. "I am Mrs. Beatrice's attorney and financial representative." "What is this?" Clyde demanded. 30 years ago," I said, "I started tutoring children in my living room to keep food on the table after my husband died. A few years later, I opened a small learning center, then another, then another." I paused. "I own Cornerstone's Learning Centers, 5 locations across the metro area. You may have passed one of them today on the way to this dinner." Jade's fork hit the plate. "Combined annual revenue," Morris said, placing a document on the table, $3.2 million. Personal annual income, $420,000. 2 residential rental properties. Investment accounts totaling $1.4 million. He set down the last page. Estimated total net worth, $3.8 million. The silence was so complete I could hear the candles on the table. "That's not possible," Belinda said. "You're a retired school teacher." "I was a school teacher," I said. "I was also an entrepreneur. I built something real while you were all busy deciding I had nothing worth knowing." Then I looked at Seth. I had been holding this part in reserve. "I also want everyone here to understand," I said, and I had to steady my voice for just a moment, "that 3 weeks ago, Morris received a call from First National Bank. Someone had submitted a forged power of attorney in my name, claiming Seth had authority to borrow against my home. That is federal fraud." Seth's chair scraped back slightly as if his body had tried to stand and his legs refused to cooperate. "I have the documents," I said. "Morris has the documents. And?" I took out my phone and placed it on the table. "I have a recording of Seth and his associate Dale discussing exactly how to complete the transaction through a secondary broker to avoid detection." I played 30 seconds of it, Seth's voice, clear as anything. The room did not move. "Dale will be reported to the authorities," I said. "That is not something I'm willing to negotiate on. He is a grown man who made his choices." I looked at Seth then. Really looked at him, at the boy I had raised, who was now 38 years old and sitting at a dinner table in front of his in-laws, with the expression of someone who had just watched their whole constructed world tip sideways. "I am choosing not to press charges against my son," I said. "That decision is costing me more than any of you will ever fully understand. But it comes with conditions." Seth nodded before I could even list them. He looked like he would have agreed to anything in that moment, which was both reassuring and too late. "You and Jade will be out of my house in 3 weeks. You will not receive a single dollar of mine for debts, loans, or anything owed to anyone at this table. You will both begin individual therapy. You will not contact me about my finances or my property for 1 year. If, after 1 year, there is actual evidence of change, not promises, evidence, then we discuss what comes next. The moment you violate any part of this, Morris files the police report." Jade was crying, quietly, which surprised me. I had expected something louder from her. I picked up my phone. I thanked Morris. I walked to the door. Clyde said my name once as I was reaching for my coat. I turned around. He looked smaller than he had an hour ago. I didn't know, he said, and I believed him, which didn't change anything. That was always the problem, Clyde, I said. The drive home was 20 minutes of highway, and the radio off, and the dashboard lights, and nothing else. I needed to be alone with what had just happened before I let anyone else near it. When I got home, I walked through every room. The living room, where I'd graded papers at the corner desk for 20 years. The kitchen where Leon taught me to make his mother's pot roast the first Thanksgiving after we got married. The hallway where Seth's school photos had hung, so long the wallpaper was a slightly different shade around the frames. I went out to the back. The flagstone patio was there, pale and new, and without a single memory in it. The fire pit sat in the center. Where the lavender had been was just a flat rectangle of turned-over dirt. I stood there for a long time. Then I went inside and made tea. Seth called 4 days later, not to negotiate or explain, but just to talk. He said he was sorry in the way that sounds like a person saying it for the first time rather than for effect. I listened. I didn't forgive him over the phone. Forgiveness is not a speech you make. It's a direction you decide to face, slowly over a long time. I hadn't decided fully yet. My neighbor Nell left a note on my door the morning after everything, saying she'd seen the commotion of moving boxes and wanted to check in. She said she had hydrangea cuttings if I ever wanted to do something new with the back. She said the variety she had did well in afternoon shade. I called her back and said I'd take all the cuttings she could spare. Because here is the thing about 30 years of building something quietly, without applause or acknowledgement or anyone noticing. It teaches you that growth doesn't need an audience, it just needs consistency, patience, the willingness to tend something every single day, even when no one is watching. I ordered lavender starts from the nursery the following week, 6 of them. Enough to begin again in the corner that gets the best morning light where the garden used to be before someone who never earned a single inch of my property decided it was in the way. They'll be small at first, they always are. But I know how to grow things. I have always known how to grow things. And I am not done.